It's Christmas time again, the season of comfort and joy. A time to stop all the hustle and bustle and enjoy the blessings of family and friends. Outside, the city is filled with magic. Office buildings, shops, and even ships and cranes glow with the warmth of thousands of tiny colored lights. Inside, the house is transformed into an enchanted hideaway. Holly and evergreen adorn the mantelpiece, and mistletoe hangs patiently over the door. The tree, with all its trimmings, is a vision of magical light. And the crackling fire casts flickering shadows over the pile of presents underneath. Tonight, we'll hang the stockings on the chimney with care so Santa Claus can fill them with goodies. And tomorrow, we'll celebrate the birth of baby Jesus.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
But have you ever wondered just what exactly Santa Claus has to do with Jesus? Or why we bring trees inside the house and decorate them with lights? And deck the halls with boughs of holly? Come to think of it, I don't remember Mary and Joseph ever kissing under the mistletoe. Yes, it's a bit of a mystery, all right. That's because, you see, people were celebrating Christmas thousands of years before Christ was even born. Santa Claus, and almost all the things we do at Christmas, were all part of ancient pagan rituals which celebrated not the birth of baby Jesus, but the birth of the new year.
Happy New Year!
Rituals which sent gods to the underworld to battle the powers of darkness and chaos, encouraged fertility and human sacrifice, as well as peace on earth and goodwill towards men. How can I explain? Imagine the power goes off and the furnace cuts out. That's all right, you've got a fireplace. And when you have fire, you have heat and light. And what, besides food, could be more important, especially in the darkest, coldest part of the year? You stare into the fire, just like the people of Mesopotamia did 4,000 years ago. Then, people couldn't help but notice a mysterious connection between the sun and life itself. In summer, the sun was hot, the earth was green, and food was plentiful. But as summer turned to fall, the sun's strength gradually ebbed away as though some evil power was sapping away its very life force. The air turned cold. The leaves shriveled and fell from the trees, until finally it seemed that if something wasn't done soon, the powers of darkness and death would destroy the sun completely, and the earth would become a dark, cold, and lifeless place. In the beginning, Marduk, chief of the gods, had defeated the spirit of chaos and darkness and created the world. But each year, the darkness regained strength. And each year, Marduk returned to the underworld and fought a terrible battle to save the sun. On Earth, everyone waited and worried. Maybe this time, Marduk would fail. The people built enormous bonfires, dispelling the darkness and spreading enough light to inspire the sun itself. They made images of Marduk's evil foe, threw them into the fire, and watched the flames turn them to ashes. The king himself was supposed to accompany Marduk and battle by his side, but to do so, he would have to die while a new king took his place on Earth, so he ordered a criminal to temporarily take his place. Dressed in the king's royal robes, he was given everything his heart desired. Oh, it was great while it lasted, but when the festival was over, he was promptly sacrificed. You see, in those days, it was believed that blood contained the very essence of life and fertility, and when given as a gift to a god or to the earth, it would magically fertilize the soil it fell on. And since famine was a constant threat, fertile soil and healthy crops could mean the difference between life and death for the entire community. When the priests announced that Marduk had won, everyone began to celebrate. The bright lights, the exchanging of gifts, the merrymaking and clowning, the carol singing and feasting we partake of at Christmas today were all part of this great New Year's celebration. The ideas and customs of the great civilizations of Mesopotamia spread throughout Europe, influencing the celebrations of every culture they touched. But it took the Romans to finally meld the many pagan winter festivals into one great lusty celebration called Saturnalia. In the Roman New Year's festivals of Saturnalia and the Calendai, Saturn replaced the Mesopotamian god Marduk as host of the ceremonies, but the rituals were much the same. The idea of reliving a golden age in the distant past set the mood for the festival. The days when Saturn, a just and kindly monarch, ruled, when everyone was equal and everyone was happy. It was a time of goodwill toward all. Schools were closed, no battles could be fought, and no one could be punished. As the poet Lucan explained it,
all business, be it public or private, is forbidden during the feast days, save such as tends to sport and solace and delight. Let none follow their avocations, saving cooks and bakers. All men shall be equal, slaves and free, rich and poor, one with another. Anger, resentment, threats are contrary to the law. No discourse shall be either composed or delivered, except it be witty and lusty, conducing to mirth and jollity.
masters and slaves ate together, exchanged places, and all rules were turned inside out. The slaves chose one of their members to be king of the household festival. His word was law, and he commanded the guests to perform every outrageous act that came to mind.
One must shout out a libel on himself, another dance naked, or pick up the flute girl and carry her thrice around the house.
In Rome, these mock kings weren't sacrificed at the end of the feast, but in the Balkans, when Saturnalia arrived, the soldiers used a lottery method so the gods themselves chose which of them would be the king. For a whole month, the chosen one was given every indulgence. But when his 30 days were up, he had to stand at the altar and kill himself. Little dolls were given away as presents, especially to children. Sad to say, this custom was probably a remnant of human sacrifice too. For Saturn was an ancient agricultural god who ate his own children, and his Carthaginian counterpart was the god Baal, whose horned figure contained a furnace into which children were sacrificially fed. Fortunately, over the years, the custom changed from children being given as gifts to children being the ones to receive gifts. The day after the festival of Saturnalia was December 25th, when the Romans calculated the sun to be at its lowest ebb, ready to increase again. Later, it became known as Juvenalia, the Feast of the Children. A few days later, the Kalends began, a festival concerned with the date of the new year and the two-faced deity Janus, with one face looking back on the past and the other forward to the future. On January 1st, New Year's Day, people masqueraded through the streets, feasted, visited friends, and gave each other good luck gifts. Originally, they were candles and lucky fruits. Later, they were lucky cakes and other tokens of well-wishing. Halls were decked with boughs of laurel, and evergreens were decorated with candles to fend off the spirits of darkness. This is how Libanius, the Greek sophist of the 4th century, describes the celebration.
The festival of Kalends is celebrated everywhere as far as the limits of the Roman Empire extend. Everywhere may be seen carousels and well-laden tables. Luxurious abundance is found in the houses of the rich, but also in the houses of the poor. Better food than usual is put upon the tables. The impulse to spend seizes everyone. He who the whole year through has taken pleasure in saving and piling up his pence becomes suddenly extravagant. People are not only generous to themselves, but also towards their fellow men. A stream of presents pours out on all sides. The Kalends festival banishes all that is connected with toil and allows men to give themselves up to undisturbed enjoyment. On the eve of the new year, few people go to bed. Most go about the streets with singing and leaping and all sorts of mockery.
Now that sounds a lot like Christmas today, doesn't it? But why all the extravagance and generosity? Well, it was rather like buying insurance for a good and prosperous year ahead. It was the idea that all's well that ends well turned backward. In the beginning of the year, people acted out how they wanted the rest of the year to be. Giving ensured wealth, and eating and drinking excessively assured lots of food and drink. But the strangest Kalends custom of all was one which horrified the early Christian church.
On those days, the heathen dressed themselves up in indecent deformities. These miserable men put on counterfeit forms and monstrous faces at which one should rather be ashamed and sad. Some are clothed in the hides of cattle, others put on the heads of beasts, rejoicing and exulting that they have so transformed themselves into the shapes of animals that they no longer appear to be men. How vile, further, it is that those who have been born men are clothed in women's dresses. They have bearded faces, and yet they wish to appear women.
Actually, the custom of masquerading in the hides of animals, women's clothing, and outrageous masks was originally celebrated in Greece, Gaul, Germany, and Great Britain long before the Romans arrived. Rituals whose ancient origins carry us back to a dimly remembered past belonging to mystical druids, Viking heroes, and the mysterious horned god. For the most part, the pagan midwinter festivals were a time of joy and celebration, a release from everyday duties and social restrictions. All that could be done to prepare for winter had been done. The granaries were full, the animals slaughtered, so the time was ripe for feasting. Since there was little work to be done until spring, these feasts often lasted for days and were full of joyous, lusty carousing, with much eating, drinking, lovemaking, and scaring away of evil spirits. Yes, evil spirits, for winter was the time when death and darkness ruled the earth and attracted ghosts and other-world spirits to roam among the living. In the dead of winter, the evergreen symbolized the permanence of the life force. Its green, death-defying leaves suggested strange powers, as if they contained the sun within themselves, and of all the evergreens. Holly and ivy and mistletoe, which all bear fruit only in the winter, were seen as a triumph of fertility over the forces of darkness and death. For as long as is known, these plants were brought into the house to protect the home from the evil spirits so abundant during the dark time of the year, and to attract fruitfulness in the year to come. Evergreen trees, which didn't bear fruit, were decorated with gilded nuts and apples. Mistletoe was especially revered by the Celtic priest class, known as the Druids. They called it the all-healer, and not only did it increase the productivity of the soil and fertility of cattle, it also cured impotence, and sprigs fixed above doorways kept away lightning and many kinds of evil. Since mistletoe has no roots in the ground, it was believed to come from heaven itself, and that's what gave it such wondrous powers. If the mistletoe grew on the sacred oak, it was especially powerful. To the Greeks and the Celtic Druids, the oak was the holy tree which, when struck by lightning, transported the gift of fire from the sun god to the earth. On the 6th day of the moon, clad in white robes, the archdruid would cut down the mistletoe with golden sickles and catch it in a white cloth, so it would be untouched by human hand. Afterward, 2 white bulls were sacrificed. Mistletoe was also sacred to the Greeks and Romans, who thought it was created when lightning struck a tree and represented sexual energy. The Germanic tribes believed that all who passed under the mistletoe were kissed by Freya, the goddess of fertility, and were blessed with sexual power. Today, kissing under the mistletoe is only an excuse to steal an innocent kiss, but it began as part of the fertility rites conducted at pagan festivals in a sincere attempt to attract fruitfulness. But most of the rituals centered around the sun and its wonderful gift of fire. For those who possessed fire could produce heat and light, cook food, and melt metal. No wonder there were so many fire rites, and almost every culture had their keepers of the flame. In Rome, Vestal virgins tended the temple fire. If it ever went out, the punishment was death, and new fire was obtained from a lightning strike. In Britain, the Druids kept a never-dying fire in their temples. On the last night of the year, the Celtic people lit huge bonfires on the hills to ward off evil spirits, while the Lord of the Dead gathered up the souls of those who had died during the year. Offerings, sacrifices were made to ensure the souls a safe journey to the other world. Sacred to the sun god, horses were sacrificed, and so were humans. People, mainly criminals, were put into huge wicker and thatch cages shaped like animals or giants and burned to death. The gods appeased, and the souls of the departed loved ones safely on their way to the other world, the feasting, dancing, and merrymaking began. The ghosts of ancestors thronging about the houses were invited to join an enormous banquet, and when the feast was over, the villagers, wearing masks and dressed up as various spirits and souls of the dead, paraded to the outskirts of town, leading the ghosts away with a tremendous racket and flare of torches. Paper hats, noisemakers, the honking of horns, and banging of pots at New Year are the remnants of these parades today. Later, the church's establishment of All Souls Day, or All Hallows Eve, kept most of the New Year's practices of honoring the dead to early November. In Scandinavia, the midwinter festival was called Yule, which meant wheel, and represented the annual revolution of the sun. And like the Roman festival of Saturnalia, it celebrated the solstice. Originally, at Yule, an entire tree, and later a huge log, was dragged into the village or home to be ritually burned. It had to be kindled with a fragment of the previous year's log, and its fire was never permitted to go out by itself. Ancestral spirits were believed to be present in the fire, and were honored by feeding the flames with food and drink. Odin was the greatest and wisest of the Norse gods. His wife was Frigga, goddess of fertility, and his son was Thor, god of thunder. Odin spent most of the year in the distant land of Valhalla, where he lived with the spirits of the great Viking heroes. But on the night of December 21st, they would all come back to Earth, originally like the Celtic Lord of the Dead, to gather up the souls of those who had died during the year, and later, under the influence of Christianity, to seek out evildoers. Odin, with his long white beard, led the hunt on his great white horse, carrying off naughty children in a howl of wind. That night, people in the Netherlands left out offerings of grain for Odin's horse and food for the spirits. But some Christmas customs carry us back to a stage of religion far earlier than Celtic and Norse mythology, to a time before people had anthropomorphic gods, when animals, plants, and forces of nature were regarded as incarnations of powerful spirits, a time whose dying beliefs have become superstitions or are labeled as witchcraft. In parts of Europe during the last Stone Age and early Bronze Age, there lived a small, dark people who survived by hunting animals and gathering roots, fruit, and berries. Many of their gods took the forms of the animals which gave them life, and their priests, or shaman, wore ceremonial horns and sacred skins. The sacred horn and cloven hoof, later adopted by the church to depict the devil, was a symbol of good, and the horned god was the very first incarnation of Santa Claus. The killing and eating of a sacred animal or plant was not an offering to a god to gain his favor, but a sacrament, like the eating of the body and drinking of the blood of Christ at Mass. And through contact with the divine life present in the animal or plant, one was blessed. Although the actual eating and drinking of the flesh and blood was the most perfect contact, blessings were also to be had through external contact, when you were merely sprinkled with the blood, wore the hides, heads, or horns of sacrificed beasts, or brought sacred sprigs and boughs into your home. Then, one day, strange giants over 6 feet tall, bringing iron and agriculture, entered the world of the little people, and most of them scattered. But some of their shaman mixed with the newcomers and became highly respected for their knowledge of herbs, as midwives and healers. Known as witches, they were also feared and hired for their knowledge of herbal poisons. And up until the 16th century, every large British household had one of these witches on its staff. But when the Catholic Church initiated the Great Witch Hunt, the remaining little people were forced to retreat, first to the heart of the ancient forests, then to marshes and inaccessible mountain areas, until, eventually, they faded into the mists of time, partly destroyed and partly absorbed by their conquerors. Expert archers and woodsmen, dressed in their forest green clothes, they blended into the forest, appearing and disappearing at a moment's notice. All this instilled a superstitious fear in their overlords that the little people were endowed with supernatural powers. At first, the little people were vindictive. They caused sickness, ruined crops, buildings caught fire, animals died, and children were stolen from their cots. Eventually, the farmers pacified them by putting out food for them. Their tools were made of wood, so few traces of their existence remain. Only tiny stone-tipped arrows or elf darts, and hundreds of myths and legends. In Britain, they were known as elves, fairies, and goblins. In Norway, as the Nisser, and in Sweden, the Tomtar. Now, throughout most of the world, the little people have long been relegated to the realms of superstition. But in Scandinavia, to this very day, the bringer of gifts at Christmas is a tiny Yule goblin, the chief of the little people. With his little pointed cap, dressed all in red, he comes every year, and children leave out porridge to keep him in good humor. And in North America, everybody knows that the little people are alive and well and living in the North Pole. There, they are happily employed in Santa's workshop, making toys for the children of the world. By the 3rd century, the Church Fathers threw up their hands in despair of ever completely eliminating the celebration of Saturnalia. It was far too popular. Instead, they decided to adopt most of the pagan traditions, baptize them with Christian meaning, and reorient the entire festival toward the Christian Sun of righteousness. The date of Christ's birthday was chosen to compete with the pagan celebrations of December 25th, sacred not only to the Romans, but also to the Persian religion of Mithraism, whose followers worshipped the sun and celebrated the return of its strength on that day, and which in those days was one of Christianity's strongest rivals. Decorating houses and churches with evergreen boughs was explained by quoting the prophet Isaiah, who had predicted the day when
Glory of Lebanon shall come unto you, the fir tree, the pine tree, and the box tree, to beautify the place of my sanctuary.
The evergreen boughs of the Christmas wreath became symbolic of the everlasting life which Jesus Christ's birth promised to the faithful, and its circular shape was a reminder of the crown of thorns placed on his head when he was crucified. Holly now symbolized eternal life. Its bright red berries represented the drops of blood Jesus shed on the cross. Their color also represented the burning love for God, present in the hearts of the faithful. The prickly leaves remind us of his crown of thorns. Later, during the Middle Ages, the red berries of the holly were believed to keep witches away, and holly became the traditional lucky evergreen for wreath making. Only mistletoe, the pagans' most sacred symbol of fertility, was entirely banned from the church. The Christmas tree, as we know it, began in Germany in the year 718, when St. Boniface arrived from England to convert the pagans. Determined to root out all that was heathen, he cut down a sacred oak in the city of Gismar. To pacify the angry worshippers, he planted a fir tree in its place and declared this to be a symbol of their new faith. It so happened that this took place on Christmas Eve. Christianity also claimed most of the pagan fire rituals, maintaining that the lighting of candles and the burning of the Yule log symbolized the divine light believed to illuminate the world. Exchanging gifts was said to relate to the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men carried with them from the east when they came to pay homage to the newborn Christ. And the tradition of singing at Christmas, from the idea that angels sang when they appeared to the shepherds at Bethlehem to announce Christ's birth. By the 16th century, carols were sung only at Christmas time by the bishop and the clergy, and the subject of the carols related only to the Christmas story. But carols rapidly became popular amongst the general public and were soon sung on the streets and other public places. And in time, carols sang of Christmas in general, not just the birth of Christ.
Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open
In the 2nd century, the church tried to replace the lusty gods and mock kings who hosted the pagan winter festivals with a more pious figure of their own, Saint Nicholas, an attempt which ultimately failed bitterly. Saint Nicholas was born in what is now known as Turkey, and when his parents died, his uncle arranged for him to enter a monastery just as soon as he gave away all his worldly possessions. It so happened that at the same time, a neighboring family with 3 girls had fallen on hard times. Their father could no longer afford to provide them with dowries, so their chances of marriage were slim. The girls decided that the eldest would enter a brothel and support the others. When Nicholas learned of their plan, he put some gold coins in a bag and waited until the wee hours of the morning and went out into the street. The next morning, one of the girls found the little bag of gold. Some say it was lying in her shoe, others in her stocking. And the next night, the same thing happened. On the 3rd night, the girl's father waited up and caught Nicholas in the act of dropping the 3rd bag through the window. Nicholas begged him not to reveal his identity, but the grateful father must have told someone, for the story survives, and in time became the universal tradition of hanging up a stocking or putting out a shoe to be miraculously filled with gifts during the night. Eventually, Nicholas became a bishop and was called to attend the first general council of the Christian church. That summer, there had been a terrible drought and famine was everywhere. Nicholas arrived at a small village hoping to find shelter, but not expecting any food. The innkeeper was so overwhelmed by the honor of receiving such a guest, he offered Nicholas a pot roast for supper. At first, Nicholas was delighted, but considering the state of famine, he became suspicious and went into the kitchen. There, he found the innkeeper preparing to chop up 3 little boys who had been killed and pickled in brine. Horrified, Nicholas fell to his knees and prayed fervently. Before the astonished gaze of the innkeeper, the 3 little boys came back to life. Nicholas founded an orphanage to care for them and became known as the patron saint of children. And his fame as a miracle worker continued to grow and spread throughout the Christian world long after he died. In the 1440s, the Spanish took possession of Holland, and the legend of St. Nicholas was introduced to the Dutch. St. Nicholas became known as Sinterklaas. Like Odin before him, Sinterklaas spends most of his time in a distant land, though now it is Spain rather than Valhalla, compiling all the deeds, good and bad, of Dutch children in a big leather book. And every year, he loads toys and presents on a ship and sets sail for the Netherlands. The children place a wooden clog by the fire to be filled with a present or sweets, and just as they had done for Odin, leave hay and carrots for his white horse. By the 17th century, Catholic missionaries reached Siberia and introduced St. Nicholas to the reindeer people, the tribes of nomadic herdsmen living north of the Arctic Circle. In winter, they lived in timber huts. A hole to let out the smoke served as a chimney. When the huts became buried in snow, the only way in and out was by a ladder through the smoke hole. Like the Norse, in the mythology of the reindeer people, the world was represented as a tree. Its roots were in the land of the dead, its top reached the home of the guardian spirits, and the central pole symbolized the world. A shaman, part priest and part medicine man, communicated between the world of men and the world of spirits. In midwinter, when the ceremony of annual renewal took place, the shaman climbed the pole on a symbolic journey to the other worlds, finally disappearing through the smoke hole. A supernatural reindeer acted as his bodyguard. To induce the necessary state of mind, the shaman took hallucinogenic plants and magic mushrooms. Fly agaric, like belladonna used by witches in medieval times, was particularly good because it created a sense of weightlessness, of floating in space. For a while, in the Arctic, St. Nicholas became a super shaman, the spiritual mediator between the people and their new Christian god, who came and went through the chimney. The other saint responsible for inventing Christmas tradition was St. Francis of Assisi. In a cave outside the Italian town of Priccio in the year 1224, he created the first nativity scene. A friend supplied a manger, straw, and live animals. People came from far and wide to see it, while Francis stood in front of the manger delivering sermons. His idea caught on, and today, nativity scenes are popular throughout the Christian world. By the Middle Ages, Christmas in England was a crazy mixture of Christian, Roman, Norse, and Celtic custom. Alongside St. Nicholas was Old Father Christmas, who wore a wreath of holly above his large bearded figure and looked like a cross between Bacchus and a druid priest. Like Sinterklaas, he inherited Odin's long white beard and traditionally traveled on a white donkey or even a horned goat. Old Father Christmas also led the Mummers, a troupe of traveling actors who wandered from tavern to tavern and village to village. Their plays incorporated many elements of pagan ritual, and the main theme was always death and rebirth. Father Christmas is often shown holding a large bowl called a wassail bowl. The word comes from the Anglo-Saxon was hael, be thou hail, and expressed a wish for good health. This festive toast was traditionally offered with a concoction of hot ale, roasted apples, sugar, and spices. The beautifully decorated wassail bowl was taken from house to house and passed around so that everyone in the household could share in the spirit of fellowship. After each sip, those partaking in the toast were expected to top up the bowl, and great care was taken to make sure the wassail bowl remained full throughout the entire festive season so they'd never run out of good cheer. To begin with, the idea of wassailing went far beyond fostering goodwill, and had more to do with people's concern to see nature renew itself after the harsh winter months. Wassailing was believed to magically bestow fertility on the recipient, whether human, tree, or beast. Fruit trees were toasted with the wassail bowl so that they would bear well in the coming season. Later, wassailing was the word for a group of people, mainly children, going from house to house singing carols in the hope of receiving a reward. There was also a mock king, the lucky one who found the solitary coin or bean in their portion of Christmas pudding. He was titled the King of Misrule, or King of the Bean. Besides instigating all sorts of antics outside the church, the Lord of Misrule would even lead his court into church and to disrupt the service. They read prayer books upside down through orange peel spectacles, played pipes and drums, danced in the pews, rode hobby horses down the aisles, and let off firecrackers under the pulpit. The great feast of the nobleman's table was the head of a wild boar, a beast dedicated to Thor, god of thunder. Decked with rosemary and with a round solar fruit like an apple or orange peel placed in its mouth, he was the main decoration on the medieval table. For a time, when the wild boar became extinct in England, the peacock became an especially prized dish. Later, the goose, the traditional German Michaelmas dish, became, until the importing of the North American turkey, England's most popular Christmas dish. Cakes and biscuits were baked in the shape of oxen or pigs, or in the shape of the horns of oxen, or of the Christ figure, or as wheels into which a candle was placed, a complete mix-up of sacrificial, Christian, and sun symbols, but all based on reverence for the grains of wheat and oats saved from the last year's harvest and baked in hope of a good year to come. The early practice of adopting pagan beliefs and giving them Christian meaning had its advantages. It made the church festivals popular, but it also encouraged a certain pagan lustiness, which finally led the Puritans of the 17th century to condemn all festivals as evil. In England, Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church. The monasteries were dissolved and the pulpits silenced. In the Puritan strongholds of Europe, Christmas was abolished. Churches were closed, shops and offices ordered to stay open during what had been a holiday period. Christmas went underground. The great displays were over, and people began spending Christmas at home with family and close friends. In 1660, Christmas returned, and Charles II became king, but he never brought back the full-scale merriment Christmas had once known. The repression had lasted 18 years, time enough for many Christmas customs to fall away. Throughout Protestant Europe, St. Nicholas became nothing more than a figure of fun, a folk character stripped of religious significance. And so he remained for almost 200 years, until the United States of America transformed the fallen miracle worker into a global superstar. In 1626, the Dutch version of St. Nicholas sailed to America. He was the figurehead on the flagship of the fleet of ships bringing the first Dutch settlers. They settled on an island called Manhattan, where they had purchased land from the local Indians. Before long, a gilded statue of Sinterklaas was erected in the main square. Nearly 40 years later, the British renamed the place New York. But the Dutch stayed on, and their celebration of St. Nicholas Eve continued unchanged, except that in the century that followed, Sinterklaas became anglicized to Santa Claus. And it was in New York, in December 1822, that the first image of Santa Claus was created. Professor Clement Clark Moore, teacher of Oriental and Greek literature, wrote a poem, The Night Before Christmas. Although his basic character originated in the old Dutch Sinterklaas, Professor Moore's Santa Claus incorporated characteristics from many other European cultures. It was the Germans who first gave Santa his red, fur-trimmed costume, the Scandinavians his small stature, which enabled him to slip down the chimney, and the Russians his flying sled and magic reindeer. Meanwhile, in England, Christmas had never really recovered. Then, in 1837, Queen Victoria came to the throne and married Prince Albert. Albert was from Germany, where Christmas had never disappeared. He himself was one of the great authorities for the reinvention of the English Christmas. He introduced the first Christmas tree and helped to popularize carol singing. While some customs were being imported, new ones were being created. In 1843, Sir Henry Cole invented the Christmas card, a well-known London art dealer who aspired to improve the general public's taste. He believed that everyday things should be beautiful as well as useful. He came up with the idea of a Christmas card, a simple yet attractive token of friendship to further enhance this special day. Cole commissioned J.C. Horsley to design the picture for his first card. It was based on the common medieval artistic device of a set of 3 illustrations. The central one showed a jolly party of adults and children with plenty of food and drink. And each side panel represented good works, the clothing of the naked and the feeding of the hungry. By the mid-1800s, both Father Christmas and Santa Claus had been used by businesses to sell everything from soap to nuts. But it was Coca-Cola who really exploited Santa's commercial potential. At Christmas in 1931, Santa Claus was shown swigging from a bottle of Coca-Cola on billboards, in magazines, and on shop counters all over the United States. And wherever in the world where Coca-Cola was being sold, Santa Claus was there to promote it for the next 35 years. But this Santa was different from the small, gnome-like character described in Moore's poem. This Santa was an all-American male, big, strong, and 6 feet tall, and he took the world by storm. Today, his popularity is undisputable.
Well, good morning, boys and girls.
Good morning, everybody.
Why, how glad I am to see all of you children here this morning. How many of you boys...
In New York, there's a place called Santa's Workshop, North Pole, where Santa Claus is on duty all year round. And there's a college for department store Santas, where you can get a Bachelor of Santa Clausing. There's even a town called Santa Claus, Indiana, where at Christmas, hundreds of thousands of parcels pass through its post office to be stamped with the local postmark. Yet, in a strange way, even the commercialism adds to the Christmas spirit. Shop displays look magical and exciting, and sometimes, walking along the brightly lit streets with your arms full of Christmas surprises, you can't stop that special, childlike feeling of excitement and anticipation from welling up inside. And Christmas is still the greatest time for giving. Organizations like the Salvation Army receive the majority of their donations during the Christmas season. Donations they must budget out over the entire year to fund their charitable programs. And so many people offer to serve Christmas dinner to the poor that many would-be volunteers have to be turned away. Still, some people have become discouraged by all the glitter and commercialism of Christmas and feel we have lost sight of the true meaning of this special day. Looking back to the ancient rituals of the pagan midwinter festivals, they are creating new Christmas traditions designed to recapture the true spirit of Christmas. One such tradition is created and performed by members of the Public Dreams Society in Vancouver, Canada. It is called the Festival of Lights and takes place in a huge public garden. Every night during the week before Christmas, people are invited to take a magical journey through the elaborately decorated garden. The journey begins with a glimmering piece of paper into which you whisper your wish before sealing it with a kiss. As you continue down the path, supernatural beings juggle torches of fire along the way. Before long, you discover a simple garden shed, magically transformed into an enchanted cave. There, you light a candle in the hope that your wish will come true. At the end of the journey, you toss your wish into a fire and release it to the universe. The forms, names, and rituals of Christmas may change. Its true meaning may become lost or go underground for a time, as it did during the Reformation. and perhaps will again under the pressure of commercialism. The Christmas spirit, the spirit of joy, celebration of life, and goodwill towards all, has been with us since time immemorial, and no doubt always will be.